how many years has your client actually served in the army to date?
He served close to 10 years.
All right, he served close to 10 years. So he'll come in on that point. The army, in effect, losing men, not attracting enough personnel. You know, what do you make of that line of argument, and that this is, in effect, somebody wanting to desert and finding a rather innovative excuse to do so?
You know, I want to make two logical points. Number one, what if the guy fell in love and then the army took so long to decide and he fell out of love and then wanted to return to the army? What would happen then? B, surely we don't retain the people in our armies by preventing them from falling in love. I mean, that surely can't be an exit clause or a reason for retention. I mean, are we nuts or what? So, what General Bakshi rightly said, that an easy way to leave the army was by marrying a foreign national, I'm sure there must be easier ways. And if the only way of exiting the Indian army is by marrying foreign nationals, then I worry about our immediate neighbors. And one exception has been made. They can marry Bhutanese nationals, but they can't marry any other country's citizens.
Major General
As if to suggest that a Bhutanese woman would not be able to memorize the codes if they were shared in a bedroom by that army officer. I mean, do you see the illogicality of this at all?
Would you like to respond to that?
You see, kindly
see, bizarre.
Kindly understand, when I joined the army, I was told, look, if there are rules, follow them, because there are generally a very good reason for putting those rules in place. Unfortunately, there have been a number of, I'm not saying in this instant case the officer is totally wrong, but we have to go by past precedents, especially people who are in the core areas where they deal with ciphers, security, the compromise of which can do a lot of damage to our rest of our operations. There have been instances of honey traps, there have been instances of the other, where they try and compromise these personnel. So the army has to be careful. It is only doing its duty in being careful. So, what they say is that the moment you have a kind of a meeting with a foreign national, you are supposed to go back and report to your superiors immediately, so that they can sort of advise you, or they can sort of
respond to that. The army alleges that your client in fact did not report at the precise moment that he ought to have done, and in fact a probe was initiated against him in this regard.
Ankita, I can tell you that the division bench of the Honorable High Court, headed by the Chief Justice, has referred to this purported investigation as a fishing expedition. Basically something that I'm afraid to say was undertaken to persecute him. He made a disclosure to the authorities at the earliest possible time. There was perhaps a time lag of a few days, no doubt, but the very fact that he put his application on record stating that he wants to marry a Sri Lankan obviously presupposes his knowledge and his association with her. So let me tell you that in instances like this, where officers are being transparent and coming forward to seek release from the army, it's best perhaps to take it as face value, as opposed to smelling a rat where there isn't one. Now he could very well have, if he had suspect intentions, made disclosures off the record without even making such an application while remaining in the army, which is not something he's done.
No, if he had done that, he could have been in serious trouble. Please let me assure you that there are a lot of other agencies watching the army. So if you are in contact with a foreign national, I'm sorry, you are on the thin edge of the wedge. You are unfortunately crossing a line. When I joined the army, I was quite clear that my right to free speech, my right to form associations, my right to fall in love, the first person I had to love was my country, above all, always and every time. And everything else came second. I had these constraints.
All right, let me bring in Sonia Fateh at this point. Sonia, as a Pakistani citizen married to an Indian, not an army personnel, do you believe there is any merit to this argument at all, or are we seeing an instance of a place where not just one person's individual liberties is being trampled upon, but effectively no one's really thinking of his fiancée, someone who refused to give up her Sri Lankan citizenship and was in effect almost forced to make that choice?
Well, I think we live in an environment of great paranoia and suspicion, and I think it's kind of funny because if you go back pre 47 and pre the Second World War, the region that we call South Asia had a much greater migration of movements. So I think there'd be a lot of marital ties across this region that would span many of the borders that are up post the Second World War. I think that perhaps there has to be some kind of protocol, and I understand that from the armed forces point of view. But I think that the reaction, what's interesting is the reaction. I was reading some news reports on this issue, and you have people from the army talking about how wrong it was for him, and how did he even interact with a foreigner, and how is that possible, and what does it say about his, and that's ridiculous. We're living in, it's 2012, people meet all kinds of people. I mean, India's full of foreigners all over the place. It makes no sense that they would not interact and meet and have a drink and get to know each other, right, and blah blah blah.
So do you believe that people in the armed forces or in strategic posts need to have a separate set of rules guarding their conduct? Sohail, that was addressed to you.
Is this to me?
Yeah.
Okay, look, I have 2 or 3 things to say. Of course, they should have a conduct of rules, but the conduct must be tempered with logic. It must be tempered in consonance with the times we live in. You don't need to marry a foreigner if you believe that foreigners are the only conduits of passing secrets. Just go and spend an evening on a Goan beach, and you can have Russians, Ukrainians, you know, Irish, Germans, everyone willing to pass your secrets if you entice them enough. So I think it's bizarre. The lesson that we must learn is times have changed. If at all you have to observe rules, those rules must be tempered with gravitas and with immediacy, and they mustn't seem to be rules which are antiquated and which have no relevance in the times we live in.
You know, Sohail, I'd just like to tell you, you're talking from the level of innocence. I have had the occasion to go through case studies of espionage cases, you know, and they start with innocent things like this. And some of them turn out to be very bizarre. You know, I would like more marital ties to take place across borders, and I would like wars to stop. I'm an old soldier now. But I'm afraid that doesn't take away the fact that we've had to fight 4 wars with China, 1 with Pakistan in the period that my young friend here was telling me about. So you have to be careful. Just go through a few dossiers of these, you know, cases of espionage. You'd be so surprised, how commonplace they start with and how they turn out and what kind of damage gets done. So, you know, the army is only being careful. The army is only being careful. You can't have an ale. You are supposed to keep your people informed, period. I mean, let's not get away with this.
Was the army being careful here, sir, or was it hoping to retain an officer? Which was it?
The army was being both. With 18,000 officers shot, and especially in the technical arms, where you pay for an officer to come and do his B.Tech, then do his M.Tech, possibly be sent to an IIT, you know, to learn some of the top of the line things. And then at the end of the time, you know, there have been instances, you know, which, you know, where some of the people with wrong intent spoil the,
but in order to retain him, would you rather not take a look perhaps at the rules which bar him from marrying a Sri Lankan national? Here is obviously a talented, trained personnel you can't do without.
If there are rules, follow them, because they are generally there with a lot of experience and they are there for a purpose. The purpose is to see that you don't get enticed into something which could cause you trouble there, where you could get blackmailed. You see, because there are rules. The moment you transgress rules, you have that guilt complex, and the moment you have a guilt complex, you become a vulnerable target. People can exploit you and do a number of things. You know, that person that you may have contacted may not be involved at all, but there are a lot of other agencies watching, and these things are happening. Like I said, please go through the case studies. You'll be so shocked.
I think the statistics on this must be quite skewed. I mean, you're talking about a number of cases of espionage, and I think that compared to the larger space where people would be interacting and meeting would be much smaller. And I think you can't cherry pick and say, okay, just because of X, Y, Z, we're going to be paranoid.
While in service, interact with foreigners, except in structured circumstances. And when I do get into a contact, I'm supposed to tell my authorities this is what happened. You know, in the intelligence services, this is even more. You know, where they are dealing with these kind of things. If they you know, they would count in hours the time you took to report. What did you do in that particular time? You know, there are cases, you know. I'm sorry, when you talk to a civilian, he doesn't quite understand this because he's not aware.
Let's get the Major's lawyer in on this because he's fought the legal battle for him. Aditya, go ahead.
I fully understand where General Bakshi is coming from, and we have the highest regard for the armed forces, not only myself personally, but I can assure you that Major Vikas Kumar is passionately fond of his organization. Having made his application to the army, they were very much entitled to pursue it in accordance with their own army order. Unfortunately, what's happened here, and I can tell you these facts, is that the application was first rejected on the ground that his fiancée was not willing to relinquish her citizenship, which I'm afraid is ex facie opposed to the army order, simply because that it is only applicable when the fiancée refuses to change her citizenship. So it was a self-contradictory order. That order was set aside by the Honorable High Court, asking the authorities to reconsider the case, and once more the authorities chose to reject his application, this time on completely new grounds. That order was again set aside by a learned single judge, carried in appeal by the authorities before the division bench, and the appeal was dismissed with costs of rupees 75,000, which I can tell you is exemplary based on the conduct of the army. So while I agree with General Bakshi that the due diligence must be certainly done, national interest is supreme, at the same time one mustn't indulge in any conduct which causes, which is dilatory in nature or frustrates the rights of the citizens.
You see, my only submission is, we are not opposed to romance in the army. There are a number of instances of very close friends who have actually married foreign nationals. They have, adopted Indian citizenship. They have risen to be generals. They've risen to be generals. So the army is not all
very
that...
quick last comments as we wrap this up. So then say...
rules are there for a purpose.
No, I believe General Bakshi has a point that security can't be compromised. But we live in different times from the time he joined the army. There are many ways, even without marrying foreign nationals, that you could compromise national security. I think the army needs to re-examine this law in the context of the times we live in. The sooner it does, the more humane it will appear, and the more logical the facts will roll out.
All right, I think we'll have to leave it at that, but I'd like to thank all of you for joining me tonight on this discussion. That's it then on Left, Right and Centre for this week. We'll be back on Monday once again. Thank you for watching.